You may agree or disagree with the government, but you have to accept that whatever reforms they've gone for, the big ticket reforms, so as to call it, they all have come with the intent of long term accomplishments, long term goals, long term economic prospects. Think about demonetization. R. Jagannathan, the editorial director of Swarajya, penned a very interesting piece the other day where he said that demonetization was an enabler for digitization, which has been very critical today in the times of COVID. It's a very interesting perspective. I'll put the link in the description for it. Look at GST. 2017, so much to and fro between the opposition and the government on GST. But finally, when it sees the light of the day, it comes with its own set of tweaks, own sets of challenges. The GSTN network has been making changes ever since as it gets more and more data. Again, a long-term reform. Look at the farm reforms very recently. Protests on Singhu, Ghazipur and Tikri borders, of course, very political in nature, but look at the long-term implications of them. Private sector participation, taking a different route than the socialism of the last 7 decades that has plagued Indian agriculture to a larger extent. And then there is Kashmir, Article 370. Now, today is the second anniversary of the revocation of Article 370. Supporters of the government, pro-nationalist voices, pro-India voices look at this date with a great significance. Of course, we also had the good news of our Indian hockey men's team winning the bronze medal at the Olympics. So it seems August 5 has to come with certain significant news. Nevertheless, it's the second anniversary of the revocation of Article 370, and people are now asking that question, that the government always thinks about the long-term impact, the long-term accomplishment, the long-term success of their reforms. Where are we with Kashmir? And the question becomes a little difficult to answer for one very obvious reason. 2019, August 5, we had the revocation, then the state was in a lockdown for several months, and then we had the global pandemic. So it's not enough time to evaluate the impact of the reforms on the ground, impact the development work. Sure, there are pursuits being followed. It's a lot been written about it. There is enough literature available online on the projects that are being pursued in the state, in the UT rather, of Jammu and Kashmir. But then the question needs to be asked, what further? But before we go forward, we have to move back because that's what the Gupkar alliance wants. Once upon a time, Mehbooba Mufti and Farooq Abdullah were contesting against each other. Today, they are a part of the same alliance. That's how politics of the valley has changed. Omar Abdullah recently had a very interesting 50-odd minute interview with a News Time anchor, and he made some interesting points. But what I took away from that interview essentially was that members of the Gupkar alliance want to remain in 1947 only. They are not interested in acknowledging the ground reality, the ground political reality that has now come into existence post August 5, 2019. You saw that interview and he was talking about the plebiscite, even though there have been forced demography changes, there's been an exodus of Kashmiri Pandits, but he doesn't want to talk about it because how can you have a plebiscite, even if it was promised, let's say in 1947, how can you have that when the state's demography has been altered so much, even by violence when it comes to the Kashmiri Pandits? Then he spoke about the constitutional link that was 370 when it came to accession of India, when it came to accession of Kashmir rather to India. To which the anchor asked a very interesting question, that would there be people who would be interested in accession to Pakistan or see it as a solution? So Omar Abdullah has a very interesting answer to this. While maintaining his political correctness, dismissing this entire idea, he said, we must not dismiss the size of the constituency that sees this as an appropriate solution. Now that had me wondering what the Gupkar alliance really wants. Because for all those who question what has Modi really achieved by revocation of Article 370, by removing Article 370, it's just a good reform on paper. There are a lot of voices like that, critical voices, rightfully so. But this is the impact of it. These lobbies, the likes of Gupkar alliance, which say that we need to take the constituent size seriously, which sees accession to Pakistan as an appropriate solution. To render them politically futile has been one of the biggest accomplishments rather of this government when it comes to revocation of Article 370. 2 years later, these political lobbies are still very much politically futile. They had a meeting with the Prime Minister very recently. Different parties of the states were there. Omar Abdullah was there. Farooq Abdullah was there. Mehbooba Mufti was not there, though. That was interesting. But again, the distance, they made very clear following the meeting that Kashmir is as far from the heart of India and from Delhi as it has ever been. So these people want to remain in the pre-2019 August 5th era. They are very certain about it. They are still rooting for the restoration of Article 370. The entire connect to India is now hinged on Article 370 being restored or not. Nevertheless, these are people who are living in the primitive era, in the era gone by, in the era which is politically futile. What is the future? This is what Kashmiris collaborating with the center need to think, that what Kashmir needs to look 20 years ahead. I've spoken to people who are serving there actively within the forces. I've spoken to some Kashmiri Muslim traders, and all of them make this one point: inconsistency, economic development. Give us the economic development, because that can solve a lot of problems on the ground. And that is what Kashmiris need to start thinking. People of Jammu and Kashmir rather need to start thinking that we don't have to look back 2 years all the time. We don't need to be talking about still restoring or possibility of restoring Article 370 next year in 2022 when we complete 3 years of the revocation. We need to see 20 years ahead. We need to see what can be the goals for 2030. We need to see what can be the goals for 2040. We can see what is the economic condition in the state, what are the working factors. There needs to be demographic mapping. So a lot of factors on the ground, but 3 main factors I want to talk about. The first is the political one, because factoring in the state's politics and the security situation, no economic development will be possible without fixing this political problem first, as it was with UP also. Not comparing apples and oranges though, but Uttar Pradesh had a law and order problem. That was very evident to the BJP government which came in 2017. And I remember speaking to one of the MLAs back then from a constituency near Delhi, just on the Delhi UP border, and he told me a very interesting thing. He said in UP, you can get all the economic prosperity you want, but you have to fix the law and order first. Now, not to digress, but the same logic also applies to Jammu and Kashmir when it comes to security situation. Of course, these are apples and oranges, to repeat myself. But the political situation needs to be sorted out first. Now, the center, first point, now the center is already thinking about delimitation. Let's fix this problem of unequal representation, which is there with Kashmiris as an advantage against those of the people of Jammu. The people of Jammu have also been making the same point that by geography, they have a greater area. By population, they are greater. Now, to give an example, the 3 constituencies in Kashmir, which the BJP lost in 2019, Anantnag, Baramulla and Srinagar, they have an elector population, which is the total number of eligible people to vote, as per the 2019 data, at 1.3 million people each. So, Anantnag, Baramulla, Srinagar, 1.3 million electors. For Udhampur, it's close to 1.6 million, which is a BJP constituency. For Jammu, it's 2 million, another BJP constituency. So even if you have delimitation at a state level, it's not a guarantee that the parties coming into power would be pro-India. That's my concern. Now, look at this. Even if you rejig the entire numbers, it will be a pro-India party, say the BJP, for example, against the Gupkar alliance. Now, the Mehbooba Muftis and the Abdullahs are not a separate entity. They all are one political cloud. And you're back to square one if you get statehood back to Jammu and Kashmir and have the elections, even with delimitation, because BJP maximum would be able to score 45 to 48% votes, and the situation would be the same on the ground. Mind you, in the last state elections of 2014, it wasn't like BJP won all the assembly seats in Udhampur and Jammu. So it's not that simple a task for the BJP or any pro-India party as well. So you don't want to be in a position where you give statehood back to Jammu and Kashmir only to be back to square one, where there are 2 parties at the neck of each other, one pro-India, other anti-India, or say pro-370. Because then they'll be using agendas like restoration of 370, radicalization of youth, endorsing the lobbies like Omar Abdullah did in that interview that day. He was not endorsing them, but he was not dismissing them outright. That's my concern. So the solution here, according to me, is you need to bifurcate the state further. Jammu needs to be a different state. and Kashmir needs to be a different state, or rather a UT. For the foreseeable future, these two need to be separate UTs, with the Ladakh being the third UT in the region. Why so? Well, the first thing is Jammu needs a separate development model. Kashmir needs a separate development model. These two are very different regions, even though they're impacted by the same trouble. But the root concerns are there in Kashmir, not in Jammu. So why must Jammu suffer? Like, why must Jammu and Ladakh suffer for such a long time? And Jammu, with its nature, with its socio-economic setup, needs to be a different state with more opportunities, more economic development. And when it comes to creating the capital for Jammu, a lesson must be taken as to how Chandigarh was created as the capital of Punjab and Haryana. Less than 100 square kilometers in area back then, Chandigarh became the city for Punjab and Haryana's administrative business, the Punjab and Haryana High Court, things like that. So a lesson can be taken, and perhaps it's a secret wish I have, a conclave can come up for the Kashmiri Pandits of the same area within Jammu as the next capital. There has been a demand for a constituency of Kashmiri Pandits too. So this is one idea that can be pondered upon by the government perhaps. But going forward, definitely bifurcation is very, very necessary. And for the foreseeable future, for the greater good of the security in the state, for national security, for the politics, keep Jammu and Kashmir as two different union territories. The second point is that of socio-economic development. Now, if you talk about the tourism in the region, that's a very low-hanging fruit. That's the most low-hanging fruit, that let's get tourism back, which is very important. Post the pandemic, people would be wanting to travel. It's been 2.5 years since the revocation of Article 370. Why can't tourism make a big comeback in the region? I think there was a rumor about it that you can Google up to make sure. Tom Cruise wanted to actually shoot a sequence of Mission Impossible in Kashmir, though he was denied the permission for security reasons. But you get to see what global potential Kashmir and the entire region of Jammu, Ladakh and Kashmir hold as a tourism spot. And not just the legacy spots, not like your Srinagar or Anantnag or all those places where people go all the time. Let's explore more of the state. That can only be possible with tourism problem being solved. You need to give them better security. People need to be integrated and they'll have a shot at earning more money. That's the most obvious low-hanging fruit. The second thing is the agri reforms. Now, a trader I spoke to very recently, we hosted them for dinner. He told me that a lot of farmers there, or cultivators rather, for the lack of a better word, saffron cultivators, dry fruit cultivators, they do not have the processing prowess or infrastructure within the region. They have to send it to Delhi, where they are paid peanuts for their produce, but the person in Delhi, the trader in Delhi, the company in Delhi makes a fortune by selling the same saffron, the same dry fruits. So why can't we use the new agri reforms, contract farming? Why can't it make a big bag entry into Jammu and Kashmir and help cultivators there secure good contracts? This will also have a domino effect on the processing infrastructure, on the logistics business, on the storage business, which in turn means more employment. Then there's also the question of social welfare schemes. Now, it's not uncommon knowledge that Jammu and Kashmir have got a very disproportionate allocation when it comes to monetary resources from the center. Close to rupees 1 lakh crore. To put things in perspective, Uttar Pradesh, with 25 times the population of J&K, gets only 3 times the monetary allocation. But the social welfare needs to change now. We had the e-rupee launch just a couple of days back. I wrote about why it's a big bang reform. I'll put that link also in the description for you to read. The e-rupee can be a big enabler of social welfare in the valley. Listen me out. Why don't you have education vouchers for the students in Jammu and Kashmir? Why not for the graduates and postgraduate? Get them access to better books, get them access to better media so that they can turn their minds away from the propaganda they are fed day and night. When it comes to people, why not have more agri incentives for dry fruit cultivators, saffron cultivators? Why not have e-vouchers for the government employees, or perhaps corporates giving out e-vouchers for the government employees after careful security considerations, which people can only spend on tourism in J&K? Perhaps that's an idea that can be considered if the security considerations allow for that. These are just ideas, some use cases. In Jammu, why can't we have construction vouchers, e-vouchers for pandits who are looking to resettle, who are looking to rebuild their life in, say, Kashmir or Jammu? Why not things on that front? So all these things, the social welfare will need to change. It's not longer going to be a blanket solution that, okay, what's going on in Kerala or Assam or Gujarat can also work in Jammu and Kashmir. No, you have to rethink. You have to rethink the needs on the ground. You have to do a complete demography mapping as to what the people need in terms of resources. Is it just food? Is it more access to education? Is it more access to internet? How about e-vouchers for internet? Things like that. So this all needs to be considered by the center. And lastly, and the most important point, investing in the youth capital. Now, I spoke to a lieutenant colonel, a very respected figure in the forces serving right now, and he told me that there is great potential in the youth of the valley, of the region. But right now it lies unexplored because one, they're used to the freebies given by the center and the state governments, which have been there in the past. They're not open to the outside world because the internet has been a disruption, the propaganda has been there, the schools and colleges have been shut for a long while. So why not invest in this youth capital? Because they don't have any avenues for expressing themselves, be it creatively or through employment. There are limited prospects in the government employment seats. That is taken away by the very few. So encourage more private industry to set up there. Agriculture would be a big enabler. Tourism would be a big enabler. Can there be BPOs that can come up in the valley? Can there be some side of KPOs that can come up in the valley or in Jammu and Kashmir? These are the questions that need to be asked. But today, investing in the youth who's 5, 7, 10 years old, even children of that age for that matter, that will yield significant results 10 years from now, 20 years from now. How about special scholarships, e-scholarships or e-vouchers for students in the state who score, say, to a 95% in class 12 or 90% in class 12, for them to access higher education in Delhi University, in somewhere in Mumbai, somewhere in Pune, somewhere in Chandigarh, where a lot of Jammu and Kashmir students actually study. So all these things need to be considered. A very different social welfare setup needs to be worked out for the youth in the region. Now, these are just some of the examples. There's so much that can be done, but it's all about ensuring that the economic prospects of the region improve. Because if they don't improve, revocation of 370, 35A, all these political lobbies being rendered politically pointless, that would remain a task incomplete. And knowing the BJP, they don't like doing that. So for now, the government should focus on three things: bifurcate Jammu and Kashmir into separate union territories, invest in the youth capital, ensure socio-economic development by addressing the low-hanging fruits of tourism and agriculture to begin with. Now, the Prime Minister has rightly said when it comes to Kashmir that Dil se duri and Dilli se duri dono hatni chahiye, which essentially translates to the distance from Delhi in terms of politics and the distance from the hearts of the country in terms of ideology, that needs to be eliminated. And he couldn't be more correct. And for the center embarking on this noble pursuit, these are the three low-hanging fruits they can start with. Thank you.